FFP's changing this summer in the Premier League. Here's everything you need to know about it and how it affects your club. Now, the first thing that's important to outline is exactly what FFP is. It's essentially a set of regulations that are put in place by governing bodies like the Premier League and UEFA to stipulate how much your club can spend in a certain financial period. And there's a common misconception that I see with fans everywhere regarding FFP, and it's that they think it's purely how much your club can spend on players, and that couldn't be further from the truth. FFP is your club's entire expenditure. It's transfer fees, it's player wages, it's manager wages. If you want to build a new training ground, that goes down on it. If you want to refurbish your ground that you're playing, that goes down on it too. It's absolutely everything that your club spends, right from the very top with transfer fees and player wages, down to how much you're paying the dinner ladies in the canteen. So let's go through the old FFP regulations in the Premier League and compare them to the new ones to see how different they are and how much it's going to affect the clubs. So with old FFP regulations, every Premier League club was allowed to lose £105 million over a 3-year financial period. So let's just say, for example, Manchester United, these aren't the figures at all, this is just purely an example. Let's say Manchester United made £800 million in a 3-year period. They will be able to spend £905 million, pretty much £105 million loss. But now these new rules that the Premier League are setting are completely different, and are going to mean that certain clubs that we'll get onto towards the end of this video are going to be able to spend way less than they are currently. So now, essentially, if you're a club in European competition, so whether that be the Champions League, the Conference League, the Europa League, you're going to be allowed to spend 70% of your annual revenue. And if you're a club that's not in European football, you're going to be allowed to spend 85%, so a little bit more to try and get you up the table to achieve those top 6-7 places in the Premier League. So on screen here, I have a graphic that essentially details how much clubs will have lost and how much clubs would have headroom-wise if these FFP regulations were in place in the Premier League for this season right now. And there's a common running theme with it. The clubs that bring a lot more money in, your bigger clubs like your Man United, your Man Cities, your Arsenals, your Liverpools, have a lot of headroom and have a lot more room to spend because they bring more money in, so they're going to be able to do that. Whereas when you look at the clubs like your Newcastles and your West Hams that are trying to break the mould and break into the top 6-7 of the Premier League consistently, they've got a loss. They're going to be losing money for those periods, so they'd be in breach of FFP and they get charged, whether that be points deductions, you know, sanctions, relegation, stuff like that. It's yet to be seen because it hasn't happened yet, to be honest. But that's a problem that I and a lot of people included have with these new regulations, and it seems like the Premier League want to keep the elite at the top level and hamstring these clubs that are trying to break into it because they're not going to be able to spend as much. If you look at a club like Newcastle, for example, they spent a lot of money. They haven't spent loads. It's not Man City-esque when they first got took over. They have spent quite wisely, to be fair to them, but they've not spent within the means. They're spending more than they bring in, and currently that's allowed. That's all fine. But now it's not going to be, so they're not going to be able to go out and spend 60 million on Tonali, go and get another Bruno Guimaraes, go and get an Alexander Isak, because they don't bring as much in. If you look at their 3-year net spend right now, for example, which is just below £31 million, that now means that they're going to be allowed to spend 212.7 million, which is way below what they're going to be able to spend previously. And the other issue with this isn't just transfers. Like I've said, it's so much more than that. We've seen Everton recently with their points deductions. They might still have another one on the way. It remains to be seen. Because they want to better themselves as the club, because they want to revamp the training facilities, because they want to build a new stadium, give the fans better experiences, try and bring the club into that higher echelon and have the facilities that warrants them to get a place in the top 6 in the Premier League. It's going to be even more difficult to do that than ever now because of these new regulations. And to be honest, I don't really think it's on. The Premier League would be a very boring place if we just had the clubs who bring the most money in, winning everything all the time. Okay, that's what we've got currently. If we had these regulations in place in the late 2000s when Man City were bought out, they wouldn't be a thing now. They wouldn't be winning trebles. They wouldn't have Pep Guardiola as a manager. They wouldn't be challenging at the top of the Premier League. And that's a problem with it, that it's restricting clubs from being able to compete. You know, I'm a Man United fan. I grew up seeing my team win trophies season on season, year on year, and that was great for me personally. But no one else wants to see that. We want to see variety. We want to see teams coming up, getting promoted and battling and trying to get up into the European places. Clubs having ambition. The league table changing year on year. That's what football's all about. That's the beauty of it, that any team should be able to achieve anything. And with these new rules, it's just not going to be able to happen. You know, let's just take Nottingham Forest, for example, from this graphic again. With the new FFP restrictions coming in, based on their last 3 years, yes, 1 or 2 of them was in the Championship, so it skews the figures a little bit. They would have been able to spend legally £25.3 million a season. How on earth is a club going to compete in the Premier League when Manchester United are allowed to spend 453, when Manchester City are allowed to spend nearly £500 million? It's just a thief of competition. You know, Fulham as well, they've become quite an established Premier League club in recent years. They're a small club. They don't bring the most money in. They're going to be allowed to spend under £61 million. Again, how on earth is any of this fair? These clubs want to build up. These clubs want to be able to go up the table, to become a solid Premier League outfit, to one day dream of Europe, dream of having top players, what football's built for. But with this, they're not going to be able to do it, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. I cannot stress that enough. You can caveat this, so for the likes of Newcastle and Man City in the past, with the fact that Premier League is now allowing owner-based sponsorship deals, so the Etihad Airways are still allowed to sponsor Man City, which is owned by Sheikh Mansour. Newcastle sponsor themselves as well and inflate sponsorship deals. That's why we see Man City have such high revenues and Newcastle have revenues that aren't that high, but are still higher than they should be at the moment. But it's absolutely ridiculous that that is the only workaround, that we're essentially having to cheat and sponsor themselves in order to get money through the door to be able to spend on transfers. Would it not just be more logical and less counterintuitive to allow clubs to spend a bit more of their money honestly? And people are hypothesizing online that the reasons for why the Premier League are doing this, why they're going to these FFP restrictions, and the obvious one to me is that they want to keep the elite and keep the small clubs small. It's not going to be good for the Premier League's product if Manchester United drop outside the top 6, aren't in European football, if Liverpool don't qualify for the top 4, if Man City stop winning trophies and Pep leaves and all the great players leave, because that's going to harm their product, how much money they bring in broadcasting wise, the English club's chances of doing well in Europe, the coefficients there, and it's just going to be to the detriment of the Premier League's product and how much they line their pockets. And at the end of the day, every single decision that these big corporations in football make is because of that. How much money can we make? We'll make that decision to maximise it. If they won't make a decision that's going to harm the chances of doing that, it makes no sense for them from a selfish point of view. And that's the only thing that matters in football now. It's money. Fuck me, fuck you, fuck the fans, fuck the little guys, fuck the fans of the small clubs. If you're Luton, you want to stay up this season, you do stay up. You want to spend some money to solidify yourselves, you can fuck off, because that's not what we want. To summarise these new rules really simply after this waffle fest that I've gone on, essentially, if you're a big club that makes a lot of money, then you're going to be absolutely fine. You're still going to be able to spend a bit less than you were used to, because now you're only allowed to spend 70% or 85% depending if you're in Europe or not, whereas before you were allowed to lose £105 million. But the advantage comes because clubs that make less money than you are going to be able to spend less. You're going to be able to spend more than every single club that makes less than you season on season, year on year. So Man United and Man City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool aren't going to have to worry about the threat of a Newcastle. They're not going to have to worry about Brighton coming up the table, about Wolves, if Fulham want to do it, if Aston Villa want to do it or try to get into the Champions League this season, because they're not going to be able to. It's not going to make these big clubs stronger, but it's going to make the smaller clubs weaker, and that's the essence of this. That's a real reason why they're doing this. So there you go. Let me know what you thought of this video and your thoughts on the new FFP restrictions in the comments below. Obviously, this is my very first YouTube video on this channel coming over from TikTok, so any constructive criticism and feedback would be appreciated. Hopefully you enjoyed it though. If you did, I was going to say drop a like, but you know what? Don't. Only drop a like if you want to. You're your own person. It's a free world. It's 2024. Do what the fuck you want. That's okay. But if you consider subbing, I'd really appreciate that. We're going to bring more football content to this channel, higher production football content with some great editing, some good mics, some good camera quality. That's what I want to do. I want to push myself. I want to make great content for you guys. So if you're interested in that, drop a subscribe down below. But you've been watching for the very first time a Dill's Footy Ramble YouTube production, and I'll see you later.